It was a late fall when I decided to take a solo trip up to a cabin I had found online through a listing site. It wasn't anything fancy, just a one-room structure way out in the northern woods. The pictures showed a wood-burning stove, a cot, and not much else. That was the appeal. I'd been overwhelmed with work and just wanted to disappear for a while. I wanted quiet. I didn't even tell anyone I was going. I just packed up, made the long drive north, and parked at the trailhead that led about a mile down into the woods. The air was already turning cold when I stepped out of the car. The hike was easy enough, and I made it there by mid-afternoon. The cabin looked the same as it had in the pictures, maybe a little more worn. The paint was peeling off the door. There was some rot along the bottom logs on the shady side of the building. But it was solid enough, and it felt far away from the world, which is what I wanted. I dropped my pack inside and took a slow walk around the area. There wasn't another structure in sight, just a narrow dirt trail that led down toward a shallow creek and then disappeared into dense trees. I figured it might lead to another cabin or some backcountry trail, but I had no plans to explore that far. I spent the first day chopping wood and getting a fire going in the stove. The air inside was damp and cold, and I knew it would take a while to heat the place up. I ate a simple dinner, read a little by lantern light, and went to bed early. That night was the first time I felt something strange. It wasn't anything huge, just a sense that I wasn't alone. I chalked it up to nerves, the kind of thing that happens when you've been around people constantly and suddenly find yourself in complete silence. Every creak in the walls, every rustle outside, your brain turns it into something. I tried to ignore it, pulled the blankets tighter, and eventually fell asleep. The next morning was foggy. Heavy, low clouds covered the forest, and everything was wet with dew. I went for a short walk to stretch my legs. I followed the trail down to the creek, where I found an old fire ring. Stones stacked in a circle with black soot in the middle. It looked old, but there were a few broken sticks inside like someone had tried to use it recently. I didn't think much of it. Could have been a hunter or another hiker. But when I got back to the cabin, something felt off. I checked the door. It was still locked. My pack was where I left it, but something was different. The cup I used the night before was sitting on the windowsill. I was sure I left it on the counter. I told myself I was just being paranoid. I made coffee, tried to shake it off, and spent the rest of the morning clearing out some dead branches around the cabin. I didn't see or hear anyone, but I kept checking over my shoulder. That night, I brought in more wood and stacked it by the stove. I made sure to lock the door and even wedged a chair under the knob. I wasn't scared exactly, just cautious. I left the lantern burning low and laid down to sleep. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound. Something soft, a crunch, like a footstep on frost. I held my breath and listened. There it was again, closer. I slowly sat up, heart hammering, and reached for the lantern. I turned up the flame and looked toward the door. Nothing, no sound, just the stove crackling. I stayed like that for a while, then laid back down, still listening. Just as I was about to drift off again, I heard the same noise, but farther off, moving away. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I found prints in the dirt outside. They weren't boots, not like hiking boots anyway. The pattern was wrong. Worn smooth in the center like old work shoes. They circled the cabin, paused at the windows, then led off toward the woods. I decided to leave that day, but when I tried to hike back to my car, I found something strange. The trail had fresh debris, broken branches, scattered rocks, and muddy smears like someone had been dragging something. I stopped and listened, but the forest was still, too still. I turned back and went to the cabin. I figured I'd leave the next morning, just in case someone was out there messing around. I didn't want to run into anyone on the trail. That night was colder. The stove didn't seem to help. I kept the lantern burning and stayed dressed, even in bed. I listened all night. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke up to a new sound, something tapping on the glass. It was steady, slow, not like a branch in the wind. I sat up and stared at the window, but the curtain was drawn. Couldn't see out. I didn't move, just waited. Then the tapping stopped. I waited another hour before I got up and looked outside. There were more prints, closer this time, right up against the wall. There was a small rock on the sill, like someone had placed it there. It hadn't been there before. I didn't wait till morning. I grabbed my pack, left most of my gear, and started down the trail in the dark. I moved fast, headlamp bouncing, eyes scanning the trees. The forest felt alive, like it was holding its breath. Every sound made my skin crawl. When I finally saw my car, I felt a wave of relief. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a while before starting the engine. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. Just trees, just fog, nothing else. I didn't report anything. What would I say? That someone walked around my cabin in the woods? That I found a rock on my windowsill? I didn't even have pictures, but something was out there. Not a ghost, not some storybook monster, just a person. Someone who knew those woods better than me. Someone who didn't want me there. And they're still out there, I'm sure, waiting for the next quiet visitor. The next person who wants to disappear for a few days. The cabin's still listed. I checked. Same pictures, same trail, same silence. I won't be going back. I had always loved being alone. Most people didn't understand that, and I didn't care to explain it. I liked quiet. I liked routine. I liked knowing that no one would interrupt my day unless I let them. So when I took 2 weeks off work and booked a stay at a small cabin in the northern part of Maine, it wasn't some impulsive decision. I had planned it for months. I wanted to get away from the screens, the noise, the endless cycle of phone alerts, and just sit in peace for once. The cabin belonged to a friend of a friend. It wasn't listed anywhere. He gave me the location and a key, and that was it. No check-in, no paperwork, no contact info posted on the fridge. Just a note, keep the door locked at night. That was it. I took it as a general safety thing, not anything deeper than that. The drive up took nearly half a day. The roads turned from pavement to gravel to narrow dirt paths where branches scratched against the car. I lost cell signal an hour before I even got there. The cabin was small, old, but solid, with siding, green roof, chimney on one side. The windows were thick with dust and cobwebs in the corners. The lock on the door was a heavy deadbolt. Inside, it was just what I needed. One main room with a wood stove, a bed, a small kitchen with a propane stove, and a little bathroom with a composting toilet. There was no TV, no Wi-Fi, no reception. Felt good. For the first few days, I did what I came there to do. Nothing. I cooked simple meals, read some old books I brought, went on short walks around the woods, and listened to the wind through the trees. I wrote in a notebook, even sketched the shape of the trees I liked. I slept better than I had in months. The air was cold, fresh, and quiet. But on the 5th morning, something changed. I woke up and went outside to get more firewood from the small stack beside the shed. The pile was different. It wasn't how I left it. I was sure I had stacked the logs horizontally. Now, the top few pieces were vertical, leaning slightly. At first, I thought maybe an animal knocked them, but nothing was scattered. It looked placed. Neat. I stared at it for a long minute before brushing it off and grabbing the wood I needed. That night, I made sure the deadbolt was locked tight. I even dragged the small table in front of the door, just to be safe. I didn't sleep great. I kept waking up, thinking I heard something outside. A branch snapping, leaves crunching. I told myself it was animals. The next morning, I found the shed door open. I hadn't opened it in days. I didn't need to. It creaked on rusty hinges and hung open about a foot. I walked over with the axe in my hand, just in case. Inside, everything looked mostly untouched. Old tools, boxes of nails, some kind of rusted saw. But something was wrong. There were boot prints in the dirt. They weren't mine. I wore hiking shoes with a distinct pattern. These were plain, deep, wide. Someone had been in there. I spent the day uneasy. Every little sound made me stop and listen. I kept the axe nearby and checked every window and door more than once. Before bed, I moved the table back in front of the door and wedged a kitchen chair under the knob. I kept the lights off and didn't light the fire. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Not cautious, not sneaky. Just steady. walking along the porch, then silence, then a faint scraping sound, like wood being dragged along wood, then more footsteps, this time moving away. I stayed completely still in bed, holding my breath, hand wrapped around the handle of the axe. I didn't sleep at all. In the morning, I found long gouge marks on the edge of the porch railing. They weren't there before. I took a picture with my old digital camera. I kept the axe in my hand while I boiled water for coffee. My heart felt like it had shrunk into a tight knot in my chest. I kept glancing at the woods, expecting someone to be standing there. I should have left then, but I didn't. I told myself maybe it was a hunter who thought the place was abandoned, or a local who didn't realize someone was staying there, or maybe it was just my imagination making a big deal out of small things. I told myself a lot of things to keep from panicking. That day, I stayed inside. I kept all the blinds down and the axe nearby. I didn't cook anything that might make a smell. I didn't light the stove. I just waited. I listened. Every few minutes, I'd walk around the cabin, looking out the windows slowly, trying to catch a glimpse of something. Just before dark, I saw someone. They were about 20 yards away, standing behind a tree. I almost missed them. I only noticed because I thought the shape of the tree looked odd. Then I saw a face, just part of one. Pale skin, no beard, eyes staring right at the cabin. They didn't move. I froze and stared back, barely breathing. After about 30 seconds, they stepped back and vanished into the trees. I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner with the axe in my lap, watching the front door. No lights, no fire, just silence. My eyes burned, but I didn't blink much. At dawn, I started packing. I shoved everything into my bag, no organization, just get it in. I took the rifle out of its case. I hadn't touched it until then. I loaded it and carried it in one hand, axe in the other. I made sure the door was locked behind me and moved fast to the car. The tires had been slashed. All four, not just punctured, slashed. Deep cuts. I stood there in the cold air, my breath fogging up in front of me, and felt like the ground dropped out from under me. I knew what it meant. I was stuck. Whoever had been watching me wanted me to stay. I backed up slowly, scanning the tree line, the shed, the roof, everywhere. I didn't see anyone. I went back inside and locked the door again. I dragged everything heavy in front of it. The table, both chairs, even a shelf. I stayed away from the windows. I spent the whole day trying to think. The nearest town was probably 10 miles away, maybe more. No phone signal, no satellite GPS. I could try to hike it, but what if they were still out there? I didn't know how many people it was. 1, 2, more? That night, they came closer. I heard footsteps again, but this time they stopped right outside the window. I was lying flat on the floor behind the bed. I heard breathing, just slow, steady breathing, inches from the wall. Then something tapped the glass. Once, twice, 3 times. I stayed there, eyes wide open, heart pounding. Eventually, the breathing stopped. I didn't move until sunrise. When I finally looked outside, I saw handprints on the window. Real, greasy handprints. One was smeared downward. I checked the rest of the cabin. More footprints, more scratches. Someone had dragged something around the perimeter, maybe a stick or a knife. Deep lines carved into the walls. That was the last day I stayed inside. I packed water, protein bars, the rifle, and a flashlight. I left the rest. I took a compass and the printed map I kept in the glove box. Then I stepped out and started walking fast and quiet down the long dirt road that brought me in. Every sound made me flinch. I checked behind me constantly. After about 5 miles, I found an old ranger station. Abandoned but intact. Solar panels still on the roof, windows boarded. I pried the door open and went inside. There was a dusty radio on the desk, and by some miracle, it worked. I made contact with someone. They said they'd send help. Took hours. When the ranger showed up, I almost cried. He looked at me like I'd been in a car crash. I must have looked like hell. Dirty, tired, pale. I told him someone had been stalking me at the cabin. He didn't look surprised. He told me, after a long silence, that people go missing up there sometimes. Not often, but enough. No patterns. No leads. Just gone. We didn't talk after that. I never went back for my car. I didn't care. I didn't file a report. I didn't call the guy who loaned me the place. I moved a month later, changed my job, changed my number, changed everything. Even now, I still wake up in the dark, thinking I hear footsteps outside my window. I still check the locks 5 times before bed, and I never, ever go near the woods again. I needed time to think. Things had started to go sideways for me a few months back. Work had become unbearable. I was dragging myself through each day, taking orders from people who didn't know half of what they were doing. And at home, things weren't any better. My girlfriend had left after 3 years. No big fight, no cheating, no screaming match. Just a slow drift until one day she packed up and told me she didn't feel anything anymore. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just stood there while she walked out. Then I sat on the edge of the bed for about 2 hours and stared at the floor. The city never gave me any peace. Cars, sirens, voices. The glow of streetlights bleeding through the curtains even at 3 a.m. The noise was constant, and it started getting to me in ways I couldn't explain. I was jumpy all the time, grinding my teeth, waking up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat. I started craving silence the way most people crave food. I wanted to hear my own breathing without it getting drowned out by a bus engine or someone yelling a block away. So I looked for a place to disappear to for a while. I didn't want anything fancy. I didn't want neighbors. I didn't want staff or other guests or tour guides. I just wanted space, quiet, and a door I could lock behind me. I found the cabin on a message board, not even a rental site. Some guy was offering it for cheap. Said it belonged to his uncle who had passed. Remote place in the Adirondacks. No phone service. No Wi-Fi. He'd just started renting it out to cover taxes. I messaged him and paid for 2 weeks up front. He sent me a map and directions, old school stuff. No GPS coordinates, just handwritten notes scanned into a PDF. I printed it out. I didn't want to rely on my phone. I already felt a strange satisfaction turning it off and leaving it on the dresser before I left. I packed food, tools, water, extra fuel, a couple flashlights, batteries, my knife, and a little .22 rifle I hadn't used in years. Not for protection, really, just in case something came sniffing around and I needed to scare it off. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just left a note in my apartment that said I'd be back in 2 weeks. The drive took the better part of a day. Highways turned into smaller roads, then smaller ones still. The last 20 miles were dirt and gravel, winding through thick forest. Trees leaned in from both sides, and the sun disappeared long before it actually set. The shadows came early. My car kicked up clouds of dust, and it hung in the air like fog. The cabin looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Moss covered one side of the roof, and the wooden siding had gone gray. There was a small porch with a single step. The windows were thick with grime. No lights, no sounds, just trees, and that deep quiet you only get way out in the woods. Not empty silence, but that full kind, where you can hear every little thing. Wind in the branches, a squirrel kicking up leaves, the creak of the wood under your boots. Inside was basic but usable. One room with a cot, a small table, 2 chairs, a fireplace, and some shelves with old pans and mismatched dishes. The kitchen area had a rusty propane stove and a pump sink that spat out cold groundwater. There was no bathroom, just an outhouse 50 feet behind the cabin. No electricity, no plumbing, just you, the trees, and the quiet. The first night felt strange. I kept thinking I heard things. Not voices or anything like that, just shifts, creaks, pops, the kind of sounds wood makes when it settles or when temperature changes hit an old building. But it didn't help that I hadn't seen another person in almost 12 hours. No cars, no lights, just trees for miles. I sat by the fire with a can of soup and listened. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I sat still like that. No TV, no phone, no music, just fire crackling and wind. It was peaceful in a way, but also a little unnerving. Like I wasn't used to hearing myself think anymore. The days blended together after that. I settled into a rhythm. I'd wake with the sun, make some instant coffee, and take short walks down the narrow trails around the cabin. Nothing marked, just old footpaths or animal trails. I was careful. I didn't go far, always carried my compass and left markers on trees so I could find my way back. I collect some kindling, check the area for anything out of place, then spend the afternoon reading or just sitting outside. It was around the 5th or 6th day that I started noticing signs that something wasn't right. At first, it was subtle. I found one of my trail markers, an orange plastic strip I tied to a low branch, ripped off and on the ground. I assumed the wind had knocked it down, but the knot was still tied. It looked like it had been untied, not torn. Then I noticed a footprint, just one, near the edge of a stream. It wasn't mine. It was a boot print larger than my foot, but old. The edges were soft, so I told myself it could have been from years ago. Still, I started carrying the rifle on my walks after that. A couple days later, I found a dead rabbit on the porch. It wasn't torn up like a predator had gotten it. It wasn't eaten. It was just dead. No obvious injuries, just lying there stiff with its eyes wide open. That felt wrong. I buried it behind the cabin and tried not to think too much about it, but something in my stomach told me it wasn't random. Animals don't usually just die on your doorstep. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the cot staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound outside. I heard something that sounded like a low rustling in the trees. Not wind, more like slow movement, leaves crunching in a pattern. Not random like an animal, but slow, careful steps. Then it stopped. I didn't hear anything else, but I didn't sleep until morning. The next day, I checked the perimeter. I found another footprint, this one clearer. A boot, definitely human, deep enough that it had to be fresh, maybe a day old. That spooked me more than I wanted to admit. I told myself it was a hiker, someone passing through, but there weren't any trails out here. No reason for someone to be near this cabin. It was private land, and there was nothing marked for miles. That night, I locked the cabin door. It had a heavy deadbolt and a wooden bar I could slide across it. I loaded the rifle and kept it next to the cot. I didn't read. I didn't eat. I just waited. At some point deep in the night, I heard it again. This time it was clearer. Someone walking. Slow steps circling the cabin. Leaves, twigs, soft footsteps. They weren't rushing. They weren't trying to break in. They were just walking, around and around. I could hear the pattern. Approach, pause, step again, fade away behind the back wall, then come back around. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I waited for the sound to stop. It didn't for over an hour. Eventually, the footsteps faded, and I heard nothing more. In the morning, I went outside with the rifle ready. I found nothing, no one, but I did find something carved into one of the support beams on the side of the porch. Just a single word, N-O. It was carved deep with something sharp. Not new, but not old either. I hadn't seen it before. I was sure of that. It hadn't been there when I arrived. I packed everything that morning, threw it in the car and left without looking back. I didn't even take the map. I remembered the road well enough. I didn't stop to eat or rest until I hit the first gas station an hour and a half later. I got out, walked into the bathroom, and just stared at myself in the mirror for a few minutes. My face looked pale, hollow. My eyes looked like they belonged to someone else. I never reported anything. There was nothing to report. No damage, no trespass, technically. No one hurt me, but I knew I wasn't alone out there. Someone had been watching me, circling the cabin, leaving messages, and I'll never know why. Maybe it was a drifter, someone who thought the cabin was theirs. Maybe it was just a sick game, but I know this much: I was being hunted. Not for food, not for robbery, just for the sake of it. And I'll never go back out into those woods again. I needed a break from everything. That was the only thought running through my head when I finally decided to go through with the trip. I had taken vacation days before, but always ended up checking emails or calling into meetings. I hadn't really unplugged in years. Life had become a constant hum of noise, responsibilities, deadlines, texts, traffic, and city lights. I didn't realize how drained I was until I noticed I couldn't even fall asleep without scrolling through my phone for an hour. So I started looking for somewhere quiet. I didn't want a hotel or a touristy place. I didn't want people around. I wanted real quiet. A small rental cabin in the middle of nowhere seemed like the perfect choice. I looked through a bunch of listings and found one that didn't have many photos or a lot of reviews, but it was cheap and located deep in the forest near the edge of a state park. The listing said it had no Wi-Fi, barely any cell service, and was accessible only by a long dirt road that the owners plowed occasionally during winter. That sounded ideal to me. I packed what I thought I'd need, mostly canned food, dry goods, water, clothes for cold weather, a flashlight, a knife, a first aid kit, and a few paperback books. I also brought a small battery-powered radio just in case. No point pretending I didn't need any form of backup. I told my brother where I was going and when I expected to be back. Then I shut everything off, no laptop, no phone, nothing. The drive there was long. After the main highway, I had to drive nearly 40 miles on a winding 2-lane road, then another 12 miles down a rough, narrow gravel path that snaked through thick forest. The trees got taller and denser as I got deeper into the woods. There were no houses, no power lines, nothing. Just trees, the crunch of gravel, and the occasional sound of some small animal darting through the underbrush. The air smelled like pine and cold dirt. It had rained recently, and everything was damp. When I pulled up to the cabin, it was nearly sunset. The sky was orange and low behind the trees. The cabin was small, made of dark wood, and looked like it hadn't been updated in years. There was no porch, just 2 cement steps leading up to a plain wooden door. The windows were dusty and smudged with old pine needles stuck to the corners. There was no garage or driveway, just a clearing where I parked my car on a patch of flattened grass and dirt. Inside was about what I expected. One main room with a small table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, a couch, and a tiny kitchen area with an old gas stove and sink. A narrow hallway led to a small bathroom and 1 bedroom. The bedroom had a bed frame with a mattress that felt thin and hard when I sat on it. The blankets were clean but old. There was no TV, no microwave, not even a clock. Just dead quiet. The silence struck me more than I thought it would. I could hear my own breathing. Every step I took, the creaking of the floorboards. Out here, even the trees made noise. When the wind picked up, they groaned and shifted. Small branches clicked together high above me. The cabin didn't feel creepy exactly, just very empty. Lonely, I guess. The first night was uneventful. I ate a can of beans, read until the light faded, then lit a couple of candles and lay in bed listening to the wind. It was colder than I thought it would be, and I had to get up around 3 a.m. to throw more wood into the stove. But otherwise, I slept okay. The next couple of days passed slowly. I walked in the woods a bit, staying close to the cabin so I wouldn't get lost. I brought a compass and a GPS tracker, but I didn't trust either completely. The trees out here were dense and tall, with very little light making it to the forest floor. After a few hours of walking around and marking my path with colored tape, I'd come back to the cabin to eat and read. That rhythm went on for a while. I lost track of how many days it had been. 5, maybe 6. I started waking up later and staying up later too, just staring at the ceiling or listening to the forest settle at night. The silence began to get under my skin. I hadn't seen another person, another car, or even a trail marker since I arrived. The isolation was more intense than I'd expected. It didn't feel relaxing anymore. It felt like I'd dropped off the face of the earth. One night, something changed. I was reading by candlelight and heard what sounded like movement outside. Not just branches or wind, but deliberate steps. Slow, heavy crunches on the gravel. I turned off the candle and sat still. The sound stopped. I waited maybe 20 minutes before turning the candle back on. I didn't hear anything else, so I convinced myself it was a deer or a bear, even though the sound had felt wrong. Too slow, too quiet, too heavy. The next morning, I checked around the cabin. There were no footprints, but the ground was mostly dry. I didn't see anything that confirmed what I'd heard, so I tried to forget about it. But that day, I kept looking over my shoulder whenever I stepped outside. I only stayed out for a short walk and returned before the sun went down. That night, I heard it again. This time, it sounded closer, on the side of the cabin near the window. I didn't move. I just lay still and listened. There were no other sounds. No wind, no owls, just those slow, deliberate footsteps and something that almost sounded like breathing, like a slow exhale through a nose. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't look out the window. I just stayed still until the sound faded. It didn't feel like an animal anymore. It felt like someone. I got out of bed at first light and went outside, this time armed with my knife. I checked the trees, the bushes, the path leading back to the road. Still nothing, but I felt watched. I couldn't explain it. Just that crawling sense that someone had been very close to me without my knowing. That day, I seriously considered leaving, but the road back was long and rough, and I felt paranoid about breaking down out there. I told myself maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I just wasn't used to being this isolated. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up in the main room with the knife on the table and the fire burning low in the stove. Nothing happened. Then the next night came. This time it was worse. I heard the back door creak. There was no wind that night. It had been calm all day. No trees moving. The noise was unmistakable, wood shifting against its frame. I sat bolt upright on the couch, heart hammering. I waited, straining to hear. Then I heard a click, like the sound of a latch being gently tested. Not forced, not kicked, but tested. Like someone was trying to see if it would open easily. I didn't breathe. I sat there in the dark for over an hour. Nothing happened. No footsteps. No more sounds. When it started to get light outside, I walked to the back door. The handle was slightly turned. Not all the way, but not the way I'd left it. I knew for a fact I'd locked it the night before. I'd been checking the doors twice a night since the footsteps started. Now I was sure someone was out there. That was the breaking point. I packed everything into the car that morning. I didn't eat, didn't even brush my teeth. I just loaded up, locked the cabin, and started driving. I didn't look back. The road felt even longer this time. Every bend in the path felt like a trap. Every shadow between the trees felt like it was watching me. But I made it back to the main road. I got cell service again and called my brother. I didn't say much, just told him I was coming home early. He didn't ask questions. I didn't give answers. I got back to my apartment and went straight to the shower. I didn't sleep much that night either. It took a few days for the tightness in my chest to go away. I still don't know what was out there. Could have been someone else staying in the woods. Could have been a squatter. Could have been a hunter who found the cabin and decided to mess with me. I don't know. I'll never know. I didn't go to the police. I didn't think they'd find anything or take it seriously. No damage was done. No crime committed. But I haven't been back to the woods since, and I don't think I ever will. It was the first week of November when I drove up to the cabin. The last of the leaves had mostly fallen, and what remained clung to the bare branches in curled, brittle scraps. I'd rented the place for a week, just to get away from the city, try to reset. I didn't expect much out of it, but I figured a week without emails, without my phone buzzing every 10 minutes, without people constantly needing something from me, might help clear my head. That was all I wanted, a little quiet. The cabin was smaller than it looked in the photos. Not in a bad way. It was cozy, solid, built with thick timber that gave it that dark, almost reddish tone that old cabins sometimes have. It sat a few miles off the main road, surrounded by forest and silence. The nearest town was a good 40-minute drive, and even that was just a gas station, a diner, and a few boarded-up buildings. I brought everything I needed: food, water, firewood, batteries, everything, to avoid having to leave once I got there. The first night was uneventful. Cold, sure, but I had a good fire going. I cooked a simple meal, read for a bit, and listened to the wind press against the corners of the place. Felt good, honestly, like I'd made the right call. There was this weird sense of safety I hadn't felt in a while. I didn't have to think about anything. I didn't even have cell service. It was just me and the woods. By the third night, though, I started noticing things. Not big things, little things. I'd go to make coffee in the morning and find the kettle was in a different spot than I left it. Or I'd come back in from getting firewood and feel like the door was unlocked, even though I definitely latched it before I left. I brushed it off. I figured I was just being forgetful. My brain was still unwinding, and I wasn't used to the quiet. Maybe I'd always had these little lapses, and I just didn't notice them when I was distracted by everything else. On the fourth day, I took a long hike deeper into the woods behind the cabin. There was no trail, just a rough sense of direction I kept by landmarks. A downed tree here, a strange rock formation there. It was quiet, so quiet it almost rang in my ears. No wind, no birds, no bugs, just my boots crunching through the underbrush. I wandered farther than I should have, and by the time I turned back, the light was starting to fade. I made it back without any real trouble, but the sun was almost down by the time I got inside. I remember thinking it felt colder in the cabin than it should have. I had the fire going like normal, but something about the air didn't feel right. I layered up and tried not to think about it. That night, I woke up to the sound of something moving outside. Not footsteps exactly, just the sound of something brushing against the side of the cabin. I laid still, listening, thinking it might be wind, maybe a branch, maybe an animal. But it didn't sound like any of those things. It was soft, steady, slow, like something was dragging across the wood. Then it stopped. I didn't go outside. I told myself it was nothing. I went back to sleep eventually, but not well. The next morning, I found what looked like scratches on the side of the cabin. Not deep ones, just marks maybe 2 or 3 feet long, thin, almost parallel. Could have been a raccoon or something, I told myself. Maybe a porcupine. But I kept thinking about the sound. How slow it had been. Deliberate. That evening, just before dark, I walked around the cabin. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe just some peace of mind. I checked the woods around the place. Everything was still. No sounds, no movement. Just that heavy, pressing silence. I realized then I hadn't seen or heard a single animal since I got there. No birds in the trees. No squirrels. Not even a bug against the screen door at night. That silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. Felt wrong. I started locking the door even when I was inside. I kept the fire going almost constantly, even during the day. I kept the lights on at night, too, even though I was using up more power from the small solar setup the cabin had. I didn't care. I just needed it to feel normal. On the 6th night, I couldn't sleep. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound again. I had this tension in my chest, like I knew something was going to happen. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. That same dragging noise. But this time it was on the roof. It moved slowly across the top of the cabin, from one side to the other. Then it stopped directly above me. I didn't move. I just listened. The sound didn't come again. In the morning, I went outside and looked at the roof. There was no ladder, no easy way to get up there. But I could see it, the faintest sign of something having been there. A smear in the dust. A small twig snapped in a way that looked like something had crawled over it. I stood there for a long time, staring at that spot, trying to make sense of it. I didn't want to believe what my gut was telling me. That someone, or something, had been on the roof watching me while I slept. I wanted to leave that day. I started packing, but I kept stopping, kept second-guessing myself. I didn't want to panic. I told myself it was just fear playing tricks. I'd gone up there to relax, and I was ruining it with my own paranoia. That night, I slept in my clothes. I kept a flashlight beside me, a knife tucked under the edge of the mattress. I didn't hear anything.
No roof sounds.
No scratching. Nothing. In the morning, the front door was wide open. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't unlocked it. It was just open. Cold air came in through the doorway, and the first thing I thought was that I wasn't alone anymore. I stepped outside and looked around. No tracks. Nothing disturbed. Just the wide open door. I packed everything. Fast. I shoved food into bags, threw on my jacket, grabbed everything I could carry, and didn't care about what I left behind. I locked the door behind me, even though it felt useless at that point. I got in my truck and drove. I didn't stop until I hit the town, and even then, I barely slowed down. When I finally got home, I couldn't sleep for days. I kept thinking about that open door. I kept wondering if someone had been out there the whole time, watching, waiting. If I'd stayed one more night, would they have come in? I never reported anything. What would I say? Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken, just signs, just silence, just fear. Sometimes, I still wake up in the middle of the night and think I hear that dragging sound. Not loud, just faint, like it's outside again, brushing against the wall. But I'm not in the woods anymore. I'm home. Still, I get up and check the locks. Every time, just to be sure. It started with a break from routine. I had been working from home for a long stretch, staring at screens, answering emails, and watching the seasons blur past my window. I needed space, stillness, something away from the soft buzz of electronics and the hum of traffic outside my apartment. So I rented a remote cabin up north, tucked into a wooded stretch near the edge of a small lake. The kind of place with no cell service, no Wi-Fi, no neighbors, just tall trees, cold air, and quiet. The drive up took most of the afternoon. The last few miles were all dirt road, narrow and winding, with overgrown shrubs brushing against the sides of my car. When I finally saw the cabin, I was surprised by how old it looked. The wood was weathered, the porch sagging slightly. There was a padlock on the front door and a single key in the envelope the rental company had given me. Inside, it was sparse. A wood-burning stove, a small kitchen, one bedroom, a bathroom, and a thin mattress on a wooden frame. There was no electricity. Everything was gas or manual. I lit a few lanterns, made sure the windows shut tight, and unpacked my bags. The first night was quiet, unsettlingly so. In the city, you never realize how much background noise is always there. I could hear every creak of the old floorboards, every whisper of wind against the walls. I had trouble sleeping. At some point in the early morning, I heard something heavy shift outside, like wood scraping against wood. But when I looked out the window, there was nothing, just dark trees and the fog curling over the lake. The next day, I explored a bit. There was an old dock at the edge of the water, rotting and half sunken. I walked some of the trails that twisted through the forest behind the cabin. I didn't see another person. No cars, no campers, nothing. It was what I wanted, I reminded myself. Solitude, space. But by the second night, something felt off. I kept waking up every hour or so, feeling like someone had just stepped into the room. That sudden, tight feeling in your chest when you're not alone. The cabin was small enough that a glance around confirmed no one else was there, but I couldn't shake it. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps on the porch, slow, deliberate ones. I sat in bed, holding my breath. Then it stopped. Nothing. The next morning, I found a footprint in the dirt right outside the porch steps. Not mine. It was too wide and it faced the cabin. It looked like a boot print. I tried to tell myself it was old, maybe from the last person who stayed here, but the print was sharp, edges clean. It had rained lightly the first night. This was after the rain. I didn't have cell service, and there was no phone in the cabin. I considered packing up and leaving, but the car was nearly empty on gas. The last station I saw was over 30 miles back. I figured maybe I was just on edge. Being out there alone, no distractions, it was probably messing with my head. I decided to stay one more night. If it still felt wrong, I'd head back the next morning. That day, I stayed close to the cabin. I kept the lanterns full and made sure the doors and windows were locked tight. As the sun went down, the woods got dark fast. It was overcast, and the moon didn't cast much light. I sat inside, reading by lamplight, trying not to listen too closely to the sounds outside. Around midnight, I heard the sound again. Footsteps, not on the porch this time, but outside circling the cabin. Slow and deliberate, I blew out the lantern and sat in the dark. My eyes adjusted slowly. The sound stopped, then started again, closer this time. It circled the cabin once more, then faded away. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I went outside. No footprints this time, but I noticed something else. The padlock I'd taken off the first day was now hanging on the back shed door. I hadn't put it there. I hadn't even gone near the shed. It was a small, leaning structure about 20 feet behind the cabin. I hadn't had any reason to open it. The shed wasn't locked anymore. The padlock was just looped through the hasp but not fastened. I opened it slowly. Inside was a stack of firewood, a few rusted tools, and what looked like an old coat hanging from a nail. There was a faint smell, like something organic and old. Rodent droppings in the corner. Nothing out of place, but something about it made my skin crawl. I shut it again and used the padlock properly this time. By noon, I'd packed up. I didn't care about the gas. I was going to drive until I found a station or a signal. I loaded everything into the car and went back inside to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything. That's when I saw the curtain. It had been drawn open the whole time I was there. I was sure of it. I liked looking out at the woods, but now it was pulled shut. Just a small thing, a detail, but I hadn't done it. I hadn't gone near that window. I left immediately, locked the door, got in the car, and drove. The fuel light came on 15 minutes later. I kept going. Every mile felt like I was peeling a layer of fear off my skin. When I finally reached the main road, my phone buzzed back to life. Messages, emails, missed calls. I pulled into a station and filled the tank, then parked and sat there for a long time. When I got home, I emailed the rental company, told them I thought someone had been on the property. They responded a few days later, said no one was scheduled to be there before or after me for at least a month. They said the last person to stay there had left early too, but hadn't given a reason. Weeks passed. I tried to forget about it, tried to tell myself I'd imagined most of it. Stress, overwork, isolation. That maybe the cabin was just old and noisy. That maybe I'd been careless and the footprints were mine. That I'd just forgotten drawing that curtain. That the padlock had always been on the shed and I didn't remember. It was easier that way. But one night, I was sorting through the photos I'd taken while I was there. Trees, lake, the cabin. In one of them, taken from the edge of the dock, you can see the cabin in the background. The front porch, the windows, the trees behind it. And in the window, that same window with the curtain that was drawn shut, there was a shape. Just a blur, really. Could be a trick of the light. Could be nothing. But it looked like a face. And it wasn't mine. I didn't go back to the woods after that. I still camp sometimes, but only in places with people nearby. And I don't stay in cabins anymore. Not ones I haven't seen with my own eyes. Not ones that are too quiet. Because I still don't know what was out there with me. I just know it was real. And I know it watched me. I decided to take a break from the usual routine. Work had burned me out, and the constant noise of the city was too much. I wanted something quiet, something far away from everything familiar. I found a listing online for a cabin tucked deep into the northern woods. It wasn't part of any resort or near any hiking trails. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just me and the forest. It sounded perfect. I packed the essentials: food for a week, water jugs, a couple of flashlights, batteries, a first aid kit, and a portable radio. I also brought my hunting knife and my father's old rifle, just in case. The listing said the area was known for wildlife, so I figured it was better to be cautious. The drive up took nearly 8 hours. The last 2 were spent on rough gravel roads that seemed to go nowhere. I passed no other cars. Eventually, I pulled off onto an overgrown dirt path. The tires crunched over fallen twigs and loose stones. Trees thickened around me, their branches hanging low over the windshield. When I reached the cabin, it was almost hidden in the dense green. It was small and dark brown with a sloped metal roof. The porch sagged a little but seemed solid. The air smelled clean, thick with pine and damp earth. I didn't see any other structures or signs of people. That first evening, I unpacked my gear, lit a fire in the wood stove, and sat on the porch with a can of soup. The sun went down fast, swallowed by the tall trees. When darkness settled, it was complete. No distant headlights, no buzzing streetlights, just blackness. The first 2 days were calm. I walked around the area, keeping track of my steps to avoid getting lost. The forest was beautiful but dense. A few times I heard movement, deer maybe or squirrels, but I never saw anything up close. I'd sleep early, wake with the sun, and spend hours reading or walking. It was the peace I'd hoped for. On the 3rd night, something changed. I woke to a noise outside. It wasn't loud, just sharp enough to pull me from sleep. A thump, then another. I sat up in the cot, listening. For a while, there was nothing. Then, a scrape like something brushing against the side of the cabin. I stayed frozen, eyes locked on the door. I waited for a long time, heart thudding. Eventually, I heard nothing else. I told myself it could have been a branch or a raccoon. But the next morning, I found marks on the wall. Long, shallow scratches on the wood, maybe 3 feet up. Too high for a raccoon. I checked the rest of the cabin but didn't see anything else strange. Still, it unsettled me. That day, I kept close to the cabin. I carried the rifle and kept the doors locked behind me. I tried to shake it off, but I felt watched. The trees suddenly seemed thicker. The quiet didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like something waiting. That night, the sounds came back. More deliberate this time. A thud on the porch. The boards creaked under weight. I didn't breathe. I just sat in the dark, gripping the rifle, watching the door. I thought I saw a shadow move past the window, but it was too fast to tell. After a while, it stopped. In the morning, I found footprints. Not boots, bare feet, human, adult-sized. They were smeared in dirt and pine needles, but definitely feet. They came up from the woods, circled the cabin, and vanished into the trees. I wanted to leave, but the idea of walking through the woods alone felt worse. I told myself someone was messing around, maybe a squatter or a weirdo who'd found the place. I stayed inside all day, kept the rifle close. I didn't cook, didn't even open the door, just waited. The 4th night was the worst. The sounds started earlier. More movement, more thuds. Something scraped against the windows. I stayed low, away from the glass. At one point, I heard the doorknob rattle. Turned once, slowly, then again, but it didn't open. I stayed up all night. The first light, I opened the door. More footprints, more scratches on the walls. One of the windows had a crack running through it. I'd had enough. I packed everything I could carry. I left behind the heavy stuff. I just wanted to get out. I didn't take the path I'd used before. I figured if someone was watching, they'd expect that. Instead, I cut through the woods, heading east, using the sun to guide me. The forest was dense and quiet. Too quiet. Every snapped twig made me jump. After maybe 2 hours, I found something that stopped me cold. Another cabin, smaller than mine. It looked abandoned. Windows boarded, door slightly open, smoke stains above the chimney. But what really got me was the ground outside. A dozen pairs of footprints, all bare, all leading in and out. Some were small, like children's, some larger, all barefoot. I backed away and kept moving. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I walked until my legs gave out. I camped under a tree that night, didn't light a fire. I didn't sleep. I just waited for the sun. By the next evening, I reached the gravel road. I followed it until a car finally passed, and I flagged it down. The man who picked me up looked at me like I was crazy. I probably looked the part. Muddy, tired, shaking. I didn't care. I never reported it. I didn't want to explain what I'd seen or what I thought had happened. I didn't even go back for my car. I had the tow company retrieve it a week later. I still think about that cabin, about the footprints, the shadows, the quiet. I wonder how long they'd been out there watching. I wonder if they were watching someone else now. I haven't gone back into the woods since. I won't. Not after what I saw. Not after what I heard at night. Sometimes, in the dead quiet of early morning, I still hear that creak of wood under weight. I still remember the sound of the doorknob turning slowly, like whoever was outside was sure they'd eventually get in.